Jana, how would you define reality?
Well, there's many levels of reality. Like, I can say this is my hand, and that's real and true, but it's also made up of atoms, and it's changing every second, and it's, losing some and absorbing some. So is it still my hand? I mean, we could get lost there forever. And so I think I've become more and more a follow the math kind of person. I want to know that there's some correlation between the structures in our minds mathematically and some external experiences. And as Frank said, this can come on many levels and be probed from telescopes to accelerators. So they're all, pieces in this complex mosaic that creates reality.
Sarah, reality.
Oh, I was really hoping you weren't going to come to me.
I think it trust reality, right?
Yeah, I think it is my hand. I didn't think I'd ever doubt it was my hand, but then after Jana, I think as a non-scientific person, reality to me is all kind of perception, and while I'm aware that isn't purely real, as in verifiable, I go about my day and take thousands, hundreds of things for granted, including my own emotional responses as being correct and real and right. So the only thing about reality that I do know is that when I dream, I definitely know that's not real. And isn't it crazy that we spend so much of our time in our brain asleep, and then we wake up and go, that's all completely fictional. I know that didn't happen,
Yes.
but the rest of it, this is definitely happening then.
So do you find that you do sometimes, that you make that division in your head where you can say, this is my reality, and this is a reality that is a reality, a common reality to all, because that level of perception seems to be, that is, as you said, one of the problematic things, that once you realise there are these two things, running in tandem.
I think getting bad reviews and that kind of thing really helped me in comedy, because someone else would say, what a terrible gig from an awful comedian. I go, well, that's your reality. In my reality, I was a genius and everyone loved it.
Eric, you're not getting out of this one. Your definition of reality.
Well, I think it's interesting for me because I do two things which impinge on that. One is being a writer and the other is being an actor. In both of those, we try and fake reality to convince people that they're watching what reality is. And I think all writers create their own reality. I mean, Dickens' reality is different from D.H. Lawrence or T.E. Lawrence or... but I think that what we're trying to do is recreate reality. So we're actually second generation people anyway. We don't really have any reality as actors and writers.
I wanted to pick up on something that you all said, and particularly, I think, Frank, you said that there are these two realities that you think of. Jana mentioned it as well, that there's the obvious reality, a three-dimensional reality that we experience as children. And then there's another level. Part of the question is actually whether I should call it a deeper reality, but as Jana said, a mathematical reality that we discover through our observations. Just a bit of history. When does that distinction emerge in human thought? The idea that there is something deeper, and specifically that can be described by mathematics.
Well, I don't know who thought of it first, but in our tradition, in our Western tradition, certainly an early and striking version of this was Democritus, who said, in opinion, you have tastes and colors and hot and cold, but in reality, it's just atoms in the void. So that captured some of this idea that there's a sort of working reality that we get around in, and then there's under the hood, there's something quite different going on. These different versions of reality don't conflict with each other. They're all describing the same world. And it's actually a great adventure to try to connect them up. That's why I said the hardest thing about reality for me to understand is how I'm part of it. When I look at the equations, the fundamental equations of physics and the concepts of quantum theory and so forth, it's very difficult to recognize myself in those equations. And it's really fun to try to connect these very profound, beautiful, sort of sparse equations with the rich reality we actually experience.
Jana, that thing of what is reality, I know that you started off as an undergraduate studying philosophy, and you felt that it didn't tell you enough about reality, and then you heard a lecture about quantum physics, and suddenly you go, oh, finally something solid, a universe of probability, which to me is a really fascinating entrance to reality.
I think it was incredibly compelling for me to realize that there was a set of mathematical structures that did go beyond our perceptions and yet taught us predictable things that we could confirm with experiment, and that it was true in Bangladesh and it was true in a different galaxy. And coming as a philosophy student where people were still trying to argue, like, what did Descartes mean? And nobody's doing that with quantum physics or Einstein. And we understand quantum physics isn't complete, but with Einstein, we know it's perfectly transferable to the next generation. Nobody's going, what did Einstein mean when he said E equals mc squared? Once you learn it, it's exactly what Brian said in the end. In Minkowski space, it's a 4 vector that when you contract it. Okay, whatever. So that was very powerful for me to walk away and have all of this kind of rhetoric get real quiet in the room. And everyone felt very deferential to the math and the science, and that impressed me tremendously.
I think that's the point about it. I'm sorry, Brian. Okay.
Well, I was going to ask, I know that you sort of read a great deal of science, and science has always been part of your work. I mean, we go back to the Galaxy song, but it was those sketches, those Python sketches that dealt with science tended to be yours in the main. Do you see that, do you feel that disconnect, as Frank described it, between the reality of your existence, just being a human being, and then this very strange world that we see, quantum mechanics and relativity and so on, that seems to underpin the reality that we perceive?
Well, quite simply, no. But that is mainly because I don't understand quantum physics, so I can't possibly comment on that. But I do. I find the thing that I found interesting, why science appealed to me, was it replaced religion. And religion is an attempt to describe the universe from way back in the past, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, and science has now updated it. And that's all it is. It's not a difference of kind. It's a difference of degree, not really a difference of kind. And so I'm always very kind to people who still have belief systems and think they're going to meet up with their relatives afterwards. I don't think there's a green room afterwards, but I'm happy for people to think that. I think whatever makes people happy is actually the only thing that really counts on this bleeding planet.
Well, that's it. I'm going to say, Tara, in both your books, you look, particularly from a psychological and evolutionary perspective, about human behaviour. It's not just good enough to say, well, that's what people do. You actually go to the roots of why we do certain things. How much has that changed your attitude towards the reality of being human, to go, oh, well, actually, this wasn't conscious, and this was,
Yeah, it's very interesting you ask that, because the difference between evolutionary science and psychology and what these guys are talking about in terms of reality is that there's still a narrative attached. Of course, there is evidence, and there are studies where people are trying to find evidence, but also there are gaps where people suppose. And I think why that attracts me is I'm a words person. I don't understand the numbers, so I decided they don't matter. I can get around a Sainsbury's. I've got all of the information that I need about reality, actually. And so, not that it's a competition between me and him. Yeah. Well, that's the good thing now. You don't even need to take any money with me. Just a little plastic book. And don't even have to count. But yeah, and I've realised that I'm the parts of science that attract me, the ones that make sense to me, and it's because they're stories. They're always told, and evolution is a story about where we come from and the bits, and we can then go, oh, I reflect on myself and I see that could be true of me, or oh, that makes sense in terms of how I've experienced human beings. And it's the exact opposite of this is a force that works, and like you say, it works like that in Bangladesh, and it'll work like that in 200 years.
But you could make stories out of it.
Really?
You really can if you use your imagination. And you don't necessarily have to master the equations in detail. If you're willing to trust people a little bit, you can make stories out of a great deal of it. And the stories can really enrich your experience of the world.
It's interesting that underpinning this discussion already seems to be an idea that the deepest description will be mathematical. I mean, you said that you don't necessarily need to understand the maths, that there can be stories told about it. Is that, I wanted to explore that assumption, or indeed ask the question, is that an assumption?
I don't think it is an assumption, because whatever we find will be necessary to understand things, we call it mathematics. The mathematical tools that we use in modern physics bear very little resemblance to the geometry of the Greeks or the methods that Newton used. They have a different character. They really have, linear algebra, and it's technically very different. And in some ways, they become simpler.